Okay, Lena, I'm going to start it now.
Perfect, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here tonight with you all. So I wanted to welcome all of our attendees to the Organizing for Change panel with local organizers. I'm Lena, I'm a reference librarian at Newark Public Library, and I'll be leading the panel today. And to start us off, I want to acknowledge there are so many things to feel stressed about right now. I'm sure that I could list off so many. Work, the pandemic, the recession, so many things, and that are leading to anxiety and grief in our lives. And it's easy with all of this to feel overwhelmed and even powerless in the face of everything happening right now. But you're not alone. And whether you know it or not, you do have power to enact positive change through organizing with your community. There's power in numbers and power in solidarity. And that is kind of the point of this program tonight, is to talk about how that works and how you can get involved in organizing in your community during times like this when it's so easy to feel overwhelmed. Whether you have previous experience organizing or not, or whether you have only a vague idea of how activists enact change, by the end of the program, I hope you'll all feel welcomed and encouraged to work with others in your community. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Newark Public Library and its branches are built on the unceded lands of the Ramapo Lenape. I encourage all settlers and guests on this land to engage with both the history of colonialist violence that has shaped this area and the people who call this area home, and to engage with the contemporary Lenape-led movements as part of the larger project of decolonization. One current issue to learn more about is the contamination of land and water by a settler company. 50 years ago, Ford Motor Company dumped industrial waste from an auto plant in areas of Ringwood where many members of the Turtle Clan live. The dumping of industrial waste resulted in an EPA-designated Superfund site, and the health and environmental effects are still severely experienced to this day. Chief Mann and his wife, Mickaleen, have begun a project to build the Muncie Three Sisters Medicine Farm, far enough away from the contaminated land of Ringwood to be safe. This farm is intended to heal the community, pass on ancestral teachings and practices, and help regenerate a healthy, sovereign, and autonomous lifestyle for the Native community. You can learn more and give material support to their efforts at muncie3sisters.org. I also want to take an opportunity to acknowledge the grief that many feel today, November 19th, which is Trans Day of Remembrance. Newark lost Ashley Moore, and her memory is with her loved ones and the community tonight. At least 50 other trans people lost their lives around the country this year. As many trans activists have voiced, we must both mourn for the dead and fight for the living. My heart goes out to every trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming person in our audience tonight, especially those who are affected by anti-Blackness and trans misogyny. Black trans women's lives matter, they are important, and they are cherished. I'm sure you're all eagerly awaiting the introduction of the panelists, so let me begin. We have with us tonight people involved in All Politics Are Local, Brick City Mutual Aid, Ironbound Community Corporation, and Homes for All Newark, North New Jersey Democratic Socialists of America, and Ridgewood for Black Liberation. First, allow me to introduce Thria Bernabe, a queer 22-year-old Filipinx artist, nurse, and community organizer who grew up on occupied Lenni Lenape land, otherwise known as New Jersey, New York City, the greater New York City metropolitan area. They started organizing while living in Ridgewood, Queens. Yes, this is confusing, where they were briefly involved with the Ridgewood Tenants Union fighting for housing justice before the start of the pandemic. Thria has since moved back to their family's home in Ridgewood, New Jersey, where they're now organizing with Ridgewood for Black Liberation while making and selling art, hosting a book club, and applying for nursing jobs. In their free time, Thria likes to sit outside with their cat, eat cold fruit, listen to music, and paint. Next, we have with us Victor Gavilanes, a lifelong Essex County resident, born and raised in Irvington, New Jersey. He is a community activist, Zulu King representing Zulu Union, and president of the Lost Tribes. He works as a housing organizer for Ironbound Community Corporation. Jorge Maldonado is a labor and socialist organizer based in Newark. Born in Ecuador, he immigrated to the US when he was 4 years old. Growing up with a working class, undocumented single mom forced him to understand firsthand the harsh inequalities of this world. After being fortunate enough to acquire citizenship, he was involved in immigrant rights organizing while in college, where he eventually co-founded NYU YDSA chapter. Since then, he's been active in the labor movement, helped organize 2 of his workplaces, and was staff organizer with Unite Here Local 100, representing Newark airport workers. Currently, he's rep with the Nurses Union in New York, representing nurses in the Bronx, as well as the co-chair of the North New Jersey Socialists of America. Next, I'd like to introduce Blessing Aloade, who is a reformed bystander. Graduating from Temple with a neuroscience degree, she knew she wanted to help people, but never knew how, so she never did. By the chance, she stumbled upon mutual aid, and since then, it's been full speed ahead. For now, she works as an EMT and takes classes at ECC, but aspires to be a physician's assistant. You can always find her taking naps in the middle of the day or curled up with a good book. If you ask her, she may even know a thing or two about fencing. And finally, we have Jonathan Alston, a teacher and debate coach who was born and raised in Newark. Representing All Politics Are Local, a community-based radio show on hip hop and Black political power, featuring discussions with elected officials, clergy members, musicians, educators, and community activists in Newark, New Jersey. So our first question will be for everyone present. We'll start with Thria's answer, then Victor, Jorge, Blessing, and Jonathan. The question is this: how did you get involved in organizing? And you also might include, what misconceptions did you have about organizing going into it? What would you tell your past self about it if you could?
Okay. First, I want to say thank you, Lena, for hosting this, and thank you, Newark Public Library, for hosting this as well. Very honored to be here. So what got me into organizing? So I first got into organizing when I was living in Ridgewood, Queens. I was living in a rent-stabilized unit, but in one of the newly renovated ones. And one day I found out that my downstairs neighbor's bathroom ceiling had collapsed entirely. And this was because of when they renovated my unit, the pressure, the water pressure and the piping sort of messed up, and that caused their ceiling to collapse. And so I remember thinking to myself that this was like a horrific example of gentrification in action. And I knew that like I myself was complicit in this gentrification. So I wanted to get involved in organizing and to advocate for the community that I'd entered. And so that was how I got into the Ridgewood Tenants Union. But then COVID happened, and then I had to move back home. And then, and since then, I have started organizing with Ridgewood for Black Liberation. I got sort of flung into the world of organizing when I was arrested for leading a protest on July 4th. I remember the day vividly. I was we were getting ready to march, and the chief of police was there and telling us that like if we took the streets, then she would arrest us. So I was walking on the crosswalk, and I remember this car coming at me, and they were going to turn. I made eye contact with the driver, and as they were turning, I took 2 steps off of the road into the street, and that was when they arrested me. And then since then, I've sort of been flung into the world of abolition and organizing in New Jersey. And I've since started organizing with Anagbayo in North Jersey as well. They are a socialist Filipinx org fighting for national democracy in the Philippines and more generally against imperialism, bureaucratic capitalism, and feudalism. In terms of like misconceptions, I always pictured organizers to be like these really radical and super well-versed in theory. And I think that intimidated me a bit. I never really felt like I was radical enough or like well-versed enough in theory to be like an organizer, but like I realized quickly that you don't need to read Das Kapital to fully understand like how capitalism works and how exploitative it is. So I would tell my past self to not be intimidated by people who know more than you, because there will always be someone who knows more than you, and that's just totally fine. I would tell my past self to definitely still read as much as you can, but there's no way that you will know everything about everything, and that's okay. That's why you lean on other people. That's why you build community. That's why you defer to others who may know more about one thing than you do. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So Victor, would you like to answer next?
Hey, peace and blessings, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Lena, for putting this thing together. First and foremost, allow me to show my respect to the ancestors and to the original people of this land, to the Ramapo families. Many prayers to the Three Sisters Farm and the continued fight for land. I hope. Let me see. How did I get involved in organizing? Well, I think I could always say that I was a community organizer by nature. Since my youth, I was always about keeping my peoples together. I led a youth group in my old church, led a crew in the streets in my high school days. But I could best root myself really getting involved in the community, through my work with my Lost Tribes family, the Zulu family. I think any misconceptions that I had coming into this, I think I could say that I think I came into this thinking that, it was all a piece of cake, that I believed that it was real easy to speak just to anybody and bring them together, for any old sake, just doing something in the neighborhood. And basically, little did I know how much, people just didn't really care about coming together for any old reason. And over time, just through experience, I learned that the best ways to bring community together was that, to focus around community needs and rally around issues that drastically impacted them. If I was to leave a message for my younger self, I think the best thing I would say is listen to the people, talk to the people, educate the people, build with the people. If needed, organize and mobilize the people, but most of all, nurture the people with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of their situations and work with them to get up out of it. That's empowering the people to do for themselves. So that's basically it for me.
Thank you so much. So next, would Jorge like to give your answer?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Lena, for setting this up, and thank you to the Newark Public Library for making such an event like this possible, and solidarity to the Ranapo Lenape land that we are on. I think just in my introduction, I think is mainly kind of what brought me into organizing. Like, honestly, organizing was a response to making sense of the various forms of powerlessness that I experienced, my family experienced, and that my community experienced. I immigrated here at the age of 4. My dad and his brothers came in through the border. My mom, she came on a visa, but eventually that would expire. Eventually, my family would end up being separated, and I would live with my mom. And it was series after series of moments where you realize that the society is actually not built around supporting those unequivocally and equitably. I would see so many things happen in my life that didn't make sense, and just kind of growing up, I really just influenced by the conditions around me. While when I went to school, people had homes. I never understood the concept of having home. I always lived in a bedroom apartment with 4, 5, 6 other people. Most of the time, people I didn't know, people who would shuffle in and out. And that was when we had housing. Eventually, we got kicked out of our house because of an inability to pay rent. So we lived in a foreclosed home most of my high school life, where every morning I would wake up to about 4 inches of water because the home would just constantly have all this flooding happen. I had family who lived in some of the public housing in Harlem, where my young cousin at the age of 10 was murdered because of the lack of access to healthcare to the people, those who lived in the home that he was in. The person didn't have their medication. So it was this long line of just really terrible things that I felt like didn't make sense. And I saw myself try to get through as much as possible. I saw my mom try to get through it. I saw other families, immigrant families from my community, go through a lot of this. So I went into college wanting to kind of find that out, how to build power for myself and my family. And as I started to make sense, I really agree with something Thria said earlier, that you don't need to read Marx to just learn that that this society is not built for people, for ordinary working people. It's meant to provide incredible amounts of wealth and privilege to a few, but to anybody else who doesn't fit a certain type of race, certain type of class status, certain type of environment, you're not going to get support. So I went into college trying to seek that. In terms of the question is what were some misconceptions about organizing? I just didn't know what organizing was. That, and where I grew up in high school, and even when I went to a private liberal arts college, I thought that's where you would learn organizing. And you realize, no, these are just rich people who just want to feel better about themselves. And it wasn't until, I actually did kind of have a class where Marxism was explained a little bit more thoroughly to me, but it centered a lot of the oppression that I'd felt around the class status of my family, right? The fact that my mom was a hairstylist who was a subcontractor, even after she got documentation. Before that was undocumented. She had no basic wage, no healthcare, no benefits. And that's what led to us not being able to afford our rent. It's what led to us not being able to have, having us to go to the emergency room all the time. So I centered from that, I really dedicated myself to wanting to build up the labor movement as a way of both having power to workers in those places that are unionized, but also bringing unions to places that didn't have unions, where you can fight for basic things like basic wages, healthcare, and other rights. And that just led me down organizing factory workers, organizing cafeteria workers, organizing airport workers, and now really dedicating myself to organizing healthcare workers. So I'm really excited to be a part of this. And I would just say something I say to my younger self when I was really struggling, to believe in the people, to really believe in your family and your community, and to always think that together we are powerful and that you are never powerless.
Thank you so much. So next, Blessing, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah, so for me, well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Lena and Newark Public Library for having me here. But for how I started, how I got involved with organizing, it was pretty random. This past summer, it was pretty emotionally tasking for a lot of people, honestly. And I had gotten to the point where I was going to all these protests, doing the right thing, putting up all the social media posts, calling my reps, emailing them, and I was getting the same generic response. And I felt like I wasn't doing anything, even if in the long run, it might have been doing something. I just didn't see the change right there and then. And so I was at a protest, and I guess it was Brick City Mutual Aid protest support. They just handed me a bag with a little snack. And honestly, I was in it for the snack, but inside was a little pamphlet, and I signed up. And since then, I've just been more involved with Brick City. And so, I mean, I still am, I feel like not an organizer yet, but I feel like I'm getting there. But just even doing the little things, it's been, I see the result more so than doing the emails or the social media posts. What I would tell my past self is that you don't need to be a good artist or a good speaker or have a really amazing personality to be an organizer. You're not a politician. Anyone can do it. All you really need is yourself. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much. And also, don't be so modest. You are definitely an organizer. Okay, so Jonathan is coming in a little bit later, so we are going to move on to the next question for now. So this question is for Thria specifically, and I wanted to ask, Ridgewood for Black Liberation is considered an abolitionist group. So I wanted to ask, what does abolition mean, and what are the goals of abolition, and what does the everyday practice of abolition look like for people who consider themselves abolitionists?
Thank you. So abolition, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore tells us, abolition requires we change one thing, and that is everything. And the more I learn about abolition, the more I understand how true this really is. Abolitionists understand that prisons and police do not keep us safe, and neither do ICE detention facilities. They cause more harm than prevent it, and when harm does happen, that doesn't necessarily mean that that behavior is then criminalized. And it doesn't mean that that person who did the harm goes to prison. We also see a lot of behavior that is criminalized, especially when only certain people do it. One example of this is substance use. White and white adjacent people can get away with smoking weed in public, whereas Black and brown people go to prison for this. Another example is when Bella Thorne creates an OnlyFans account. She gets praised for being a sexually liberated girl boss, and then makes all this money off of it, but then actual sex workers are stigmatized and ridiculed and criminalized, abused, and exploited just for doing their work. This is because the prison industrial complex is designed specifically to target and exploit, control, repress, criminalize, and dehumanize Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, poor people, queer people, disabled people, immigrants, and all other oppressed peoples. We understand that the police are tools of the capitalist ruling class, and its only function is to restrict and control the movement of oppressed people for the sake of profit. And so at the end of the day, the prisons and police only exist to feed cheap labor into the machine that is racial capitalism. But the prison industrial complex sort of involves more than just like the prisons and jails. It involves media conglomerates. It involves politicians like Kamala Harris, whose career was literally built off of ensuring that there were enough prisoners to exploit. It also involves politicians like Hudson County freeholder Veneri and DeGeese, who support ICE contracts. And it involves the companies like Amazon that profits off prison labor. The PIC, the prison industrial complex, is connected to border imperialism and the military industrial complex, which destroys countries abroad and causes people to migrate to countries like the US, where they are then criminalized and detained for trying to escape the mess that the US had made in their country, only ultimately to be sent back to their said countries. And the PIC also involves social workers and healthcare professionals who perpetuate carceral logic or this punishment mindset. And that's the mindset that when people do harm, they must be punished by being ostracized and isolated. And that's the very mindset that must be abolished. So the goal of abolition is not to just abolish police and prisons. It's not just to abolish the arbitrary borders, both physical and metaphorical, that have been imposed onto us. And the goal of abolition is to abolish the cop in our mind that tells us that criminals, or like really any other group that is othered, must be sent away, locked up, and abandoned. So Angela Davis, she writes that we thus think about imprisonment as a fate reserved for others, a fate reserved for evildoers, to use a term recently popularized by George W. Bush. Because of persistent power of racism, criminals and evildoers are in our collective imagination fantasized as people of color. The prison therefore functions ideologically as an abstract site into which undesirables are deposited, relieving us of the responsibility of thinking about real issues afflicting those communities from which prisoners are drawn in disproportionate numbers. And then another quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, she writes that prisons are a geographical solution to socioeconomic problems. And so abolition demands that we think long and hard about these real issues. It asks us to imagine this world that we want to live in and not just think about what is realistic in this current socio-political and economic climate. So abolitionists don't yet have all of the answers, and it's impossible to fully know what like this world might look like until we get there, but we must imagine it anyway, and we must fight for it anyway, and we must work together in our communities to build that world. In everyday praxis, abolition looks like care work. It looks like community care, mutual aid, community defense, harm reduction, healthcare for all, mental health care for all, education for all, housing for all, and a living wage. In praxis, it means making sure that everyone's needs are met, making sure that everyone eats like what BLM Patterson does every Friday at 6 p.m., and making sure that everyone has safe housing. And all of this it encompasses abolition in praxis, and we need all of this to help us build this world without cages, without cops, and without borders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my next question is also for you. I wanted to ask, because Ridgewood for Black Liberation is structured in a non-hierarchical way, I wanted to ask you what organizing without hierarchy looks like. And I wanted to ask, how does that affect decision-making on the day-to-day?
Yeah, so non-hierarchical means that no one person or one group of people within our larger organization is like designated as like the leader that makes decisions for the group. We organize horizontally instead of vertically. And we were intentional about being non-hierarchical because hierarchy in and of itself is sort of the root of like racism and white supremacy, the patriarchy and ableism, homophobia, etc. And we are non-hierarchical because we can create these conditions to build the world that we want to live in. And we want to live in an egalitarian world where we're all empowered and involved in the decision-making. So in practice, we sort of have a hybrid of like consensual decision-making and democracy sort of as appropriate just to help keep things moving along. And each person's involved in the decision-making, but also we're intentional about like amplifying the BIPOC voices and like especially prioritizing like BIPOC's availability when scheduling meetings. And so when we do have these general meetings, we tend to do like a progressive stack. So then when BIPOC say stack, then they go before the white folks. And that's to make sure that the white folks like give space to the BIPOC in the group. And then we also have like affinity groups. So we have the BIPOC group and then the white folks group. And this is so that like BIPOC can have like a safe space to talk with other BIPOC about whatever it is that's happening within the group. So yeah, that's non-hierarchical organizing.
Perfect, thank you so much. So my last question directly for you here is, how does Ridgewood for Black Liberation include currently incarcerated people? Do you have contact with anyone in prison?
Yeah, so last month, actually, we had a campaign to send incarcerated folks informational packets about how to get their stimulus checks. And also we gave them 2 copies of like the 1040 forms. We had about like 200 people participate in the campaign, and we were able to send almost 2,000 informational packets to prisoners. So that was a really like great campaign that we were involved in. And then this month, we are gonna launch our letter writing campaign to incarcerated folks. So you can join us on Sunday the 29th at 1 p.m. to learn about letter writing to folks on the inside. You can RSVP at bit.ly/RW for like the number, capital BL 1129. Or you can go to our link tree. And we do this because we want to show solidarity with folks on the inside. This is like abolitionist praxis, like at its peak. Letter writing is how like we overcome the isolation and like erasure that folks on the inside feel. This is how we undermine the dehumanization and the destruction of the industrial complex, the prison industrial complex. And then the very act of gathering in a group to write letters is a way of like taking collective action and a way of building community. And so that's how we support folks on the inside. It's really important to just like communicate with them and to show solidarity and show support in that way.
Thank you so much. All right, so I am moving on to the next question. So this one is another question for everyone. And Thria will actually end up starting with your answer to this question. So it really will be another question for you actually. And then for everyone else to answer as well. So this question is, you know, what does organizing or being an organizer mean to you? And do you distinguish between what you would consider activism versus organizing? And if so, how would you distinguish that?
Organizing to me sort of means just like connecting the right people with the other right people at the right place at the right time, and sort of like making sure that things are happening. It means like facilitating difficult conversations, but the necessary conversations. And it means engaging with the community that you're advocating for, engaging with the communities that you're in, and figuring out ways to then act and make change. I would say that activists stand up for justice and show up to do the right thing, whereas organizers are the ones that like make sure that that thing happens in the first place.
Great, thank you. So Victor, would you like to answer next? Oh, I think you are still muted, Victor.
Oh, I apologize. Hello?
No worries.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. Had a little, almost burned the house down over here. All right. She said, what does organizing mean to me? Is that the question we're at? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all good. So yeah, what does organizing or being an organizer mean to you? And do you distinguish between organizing and activism? And if so, how?
Well, in a nutshell, I guess organizing, I guess, is like it's a function of management, right? So it's about developing an organizational structure. So that deals with putting together a framework based on whatever the focus or goals are in a group or even a community. An organizer engages with the community to form a group, even to bring families together for an event. They will meet with political officials, city police, clergy, even attend community meetings to remain relevant with what's going on in the city. I think for myself, thinking about the difference between activism and organizing, although like there are some who don't see the difference, really, there's like it's a thin line in my opinion. Organizers and activists may do a lot of the same work. They're intertwined in some ways, rooted in many things, but I feel what separates the two is, for instance, one is like structured, planned, established, and executed. The other is passionate, it's nurturing, it's directly investing your personal time and energy. Organizing is sitting at the table negotiating change, while activism is putting pressure on those who drag their feet when our community is begging for change, you know? Organizers work with the city and legal representatives to provide, providing the demands of the community to change or making policies. Activists really hold city, county, and state reps accountable for not providing much needed resources, funding, or for ignoring the demands set by the community. It's like no strings attached, you know? It's no paycheck, there's no clocking out. Like when there's a call to action, for me, an activist puts their freedom and life on the line. You know what I'm saying? Like that's how I differentiate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So next, would Jorge want to answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much. And again, I am so honored to be around such intelligent, really bright, experienced people. So cannot say how honored I am to do this. But yeah, so, in terms of, what does organizing, I'll separate one a little bit more in depth, the other just a little bit more straightforward. What does organizing mean? And what does being an organizer mean to you? I base a lot of my own kind of approach to it from Jane McAlevey. So for folks who may have read her work, please do so. Or, that's what I'm going to be referencing, but also those who haven't, I really recommend it. But broadly, personally, I think of organizing as three things. I think of it, one, as winning people over to a vision of change that puts ordinary people at the driver's seat of the change they want to see in the world. Two, I believe it's about developing people's capacity to lead, and then inspiring those people to inspire others to lead, or what I call a leadership engine. And three, it's about building democratic organizations that challenge power structures and that bring people into direct conflict with those who are against their demands. Now, just to summarize the first point of that, winning people over to a vision of change that puts them at the driver's seat, I want to quote something from Jane McAlevey, which is, her quote is, "To win big, we have to follow the methods of spending very little time engaging with people who already agree and devote most of our time to the harder work of helping people who do not agree, who come to understand who is really to blame for the pain in their lives." And I would really use this point to compare the difference between what organizing is, or what people call activism or mobilizing. If organizing brings together even greater numbers of ordinary people to act together as one force, develop their capacities, and systematically grow their power, mobilizing or activism is about engaging in people who are already politically inclined to participate in short-term actions that, while occasionally appearing powerful by their numbers or size, do little to sustain a long-term project and appeal to a base of a real social force and develop the capacity of those involved. Organizing, unlike mobilizing or activism, engages people who would not ordinarily consider themselves political actors, people who might have thought that politics only means voting. Organizing shows that they have, in effect, change on issues that are materially relevant to their day-to-day lives, develops their abilities and confidence, and helps them engage and develop others. So that's what I think the difference between activism is and organizing. Organizing is about bringing people in who are not already going to be committed to this project, winning the vast majority of people who are susceptible or who benefit from the project that we're trying to build. And then the other part about what makes an organizer, I'm somewhat confident to say it's two things that can make anybody an amazing and outstanding organizer. And that is being committed and being curious. I think are two very important skills. You have to be committed to wanting to do the work, right? Doesn't matter if you know everything or if you'll feel confident about everything, just being about committed. And then the second part is be curious, be willing to learn, be willing to challenge yourself, be willing to challenge others. I think anybody can be an organizer, but the work itself, as someone just posted on the chat, there are no shortcuts to it. So we have to build this together.
Thank you so much. So let's see here. Blessing, would you want to answer the question next?
Yeah, of course. So for me, organizing or being an organizer means forming, connecting, and just strengthening community networks. And I feel like this has already been answered in the way I'm going to answer it. But for me, organizing is different than activism because it is that much more accessible. It's not something that you need to like go to school for or like study a lot about. It's just like Jorge said, you just have to be committed and just have and be curious and willing to do the work yourself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So I am going to, it looks like Jonathan has not yet entered, so I'm going to move on to the next stage of questions, but maybe once he gets on, we'll circle back around and he can answer some of these ones he's missed. All right, so this is a question specifically for Victor, and I wanted to ask, when you talk about housing justice, what does that mean? What are the goals of housing justice, and what does the everyday practice of housing organizing look like to you?
Well, housing justice, I guess you say like, well, it's fundamentally housing is a human right, right? But few get to enjoy it in this country. The justice work focuses around protecting tenants and organizing around housing for all. Indigenous, people of color, whites, don't matter. You know what I'm saying? Also people with disabilities, and for poor families who are struggling on an income. I mean, all should have access, you know what I'm saying, to live in healthy and secure homes, you know what I'm saying? Housing justice for me is, you know what I'm saying, just providing something safe, allowing the family to feel like they have something that's theirs, you know what I'm saying, and to be at peace. You know what I'm saying? Organizing around it is difficult. I mean, you got a lot of folks that just don't trust people. You know what I'm saying? Sadly, you know what I'm saying? They don't trust just anybody come knocking at the door, you know? So, you know, the way I come about organizing is I treat everybody like family. So, you know, I sit and talk with a lot of folks, educate them on a lot of things. I teach them about their tenant rights and you know, try to encourage them to want to engage in activities that are better in their situation. A lot of tenants are scared. A lot of them are afraid, especially our undocumented families. They are our most vulnerable across the state, across the nation. And sadly, you know, focusing around our Black and brown communities, which are mostly frontline communities, which means they're affected by a lot of environmental and economic disparities, you know, environmental issues and economic disparities, and trying to sit with them and organize them while they're dealing with a scale of many different things, from drugs, gun violence, from, you know, constantly being given a door closed by by government assistance. You know what I'm saying? It's difficult sometimes, especially representing an agency, to come and engage with them. To them they think, yo, you get a paycheck and you get to go home and be safe and da 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 da. Hey, listen, I do this thing every single day, so I live this with them, and I understand the struggles. I've cried with them. I've been angry with them. You know what I'm saying? And I always my whole thing is to empower the family to really engage and do something better, or to put pressure on those who's needed to help them out and utilize city services, because a lot of folks, although these city services have been there forever, a lot of folks really don't, really don't even know about them, especially undocumented families who, sadly, a lot of those services they're not even qualified for because they're undocumented. And that's another angle of the housing work, right? Because now we organize around how can we get services, how can we get funding for our undocumented families who are facing housing issues because of slumlords who are abusing them, who are taking advantage of them, who are charging them crazy rent prices for like a jail cell, really. You know what I'm saying? Like educating those folks. Undocumented families come from their countries, and sadly, a lot of these undocumented families are not really, they're not really trustworthy of government agencies. They're not trustworthy of just anybody coming to them. They're in fear already, because a lot of them flee to come into this country from numerous crazy things that were going on in their country. So they come here hoping for opportunity, and end up having to deal with landlords who just don't care about their living conditions, and have them paying rents for places that are infested, for places that are falling apart. And that's where housing organizers get involved and help them. And thankfully we have some programs like Rights to Counsel, which allows legal folks to actually assist some of these undocumented families in court. Stand up for them and speak up for them in court. And we need more services like that out there, and that's what the organizing work is. You strategize, you listen to the problems of our families, what they're going through. You sit with them, you try to organize things to propose new services to start up in the city or in the county level. And there's a lot to it, and it's a really difficult thing for many of the families, especially right now in the pandemic. I mean, just in the first phase of the pandemic, I remember there was like 5,000 evictions that were filed. Haven't been put in through yet, but in the beginning part of the pandemic, 5,000 eviction cases were filed, even during the moratorium. As soon as the end of the moratorium kicked up, the first part of the moratorium kicked up, and that just showed us how hard the work is going to be for us during this pandemic and after. That's a big worry too, because a lot of the things that are set in place to protect renters are only limited, and once this pandemic lifts up, it's going to be game time for these landlords. And the idea is to get down in our families and talk with them and educate them, get them prepared, get them ready, get them get them unified, if anything, if we have to put pressures and to have them engage in speaking to their legislators to push for things to protect them. There's just so much to it, and I could go on forever speaking about it. To me, it's traumatic. This pandemic hasn't been easy on all levels. But when it comes to housing, this housing crisis, we were already in a housing crisis to begin with. There was already gentrification coming into the city of Newark. There was already rents skyrocketing all over the place. And here we are now in the pandemic, and there's still things happening. There's still developments trying to come in. There's still landlords trying to take advantage and force tenants out. There's many of these families that have already been kicked out during the pandemic. And, it's a limited amount of organizers on the ground. So you could imagine how heavy this work is,
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my next question is also for you. I was hoping you would be able to explain what is the People's Bill and how does that relate to housing justice?
Whew, all right. Well, so the People's Bill, A4034, aims to provide protection to tenants, homeowners, landlords who have suffered significant financial loss due to the coronavirus pandemic. It's preventing evictions by mandating the current moratorium on evictions of tenants, making sure it doesn't get lifted until after 60 days after, following the emergency period. It helps landlords, homeowners of single and multifamily homes to avoid mortgage default by creating pauses and setting into place repayment plans. This bill brings help to anyone who has become unemployed, increase their payouts, through childcare, or help unexpected funeral expenses that has occurred during the COVID-19 time. The EJ and housing team have been instrumental and assisted a lot with assembly. ICC's EJ and housing team has worked a lot with Assemblywoman Timberlake alongside of many different organizations in the state of New Jersey to mold this bill. And today we just recently had a rally. It went from 3 to about 5 o'clock earlier today, urging residents, business owners, landlords and all to call your legislators and to have them, push this in. We've already been through a couple of phases of approval. We're like right at the door, and we just need our higher ups to sign that through so that we can get this bill in motion. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So my next question for you is slightly more personal. I wanted to ask, how do you see your relationship with the Zulu Union relating to your work with Ironbound Community Corporation and other organizing?
Well, I guess I could say, I guess to start off with, the Zulu Union is a coalition of chapters that works together to educate, uplift, unify, and empower the people while committed to preserving the culture of hip hop. It being connected to one of my roots of why I got involved with activism. It was a great influence in my life. Being a part of the organization, I was able to sit with a lot of like-minded men and women who come from communities just like mine in Irvington, you know what I'm saying? I learned a lot about the history of the movements in the 60s and 70s from elder activists that I met along the way. Being guided by them, building ideas and strategies of how to engage and provide help for our people. It led me into a lot of work from gang prevention, youth mentorship, feed and clean, the community programs, and creating Stop the Violence Back to School events while advocating for Indigenous, Black, and Brown unity in our streets. This is like my segue into public speaking with the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, People's Organization for Progress, along with my Lost Tribes family. ICC recognized my years of effort, and they basically brought me on board and brought me to the forefront of housing justice organizing, which was a whole new ball game for me. I'm always gonna say it. But through them, I've learned valuable ways, strategies, ideas, just different methods of engaging the community, and given such a larger lens to the justice work that I was doing before, and saw how much more was going on a greater stage, where I felt that a lot of the energy and passion that I put in more on the grounds, I could really bring to a higher level. So, that's more or less how it relates. Zulu Union doesn't actually sit with ICC, it's just through me, myself, and through my members out here in Newark. But yeah, that's just basically it. Bless.
Thank you so much. I wanted to move on to the next question for everyone. And I also wanted to acknowledge that Jonathan Alston is here now. Once we go through this round, you're going to be the last in the lineup to answer this question, but afterwards I'm also going to ask you 2 additional questions that you missed before you hopped on. So that's how I'll do that. So first we're going to start with Thria, and this question is, what does organizing look like in your day-to-day life? And, like in between the big events, in between, the flashier things that more people might notice, like what is just like an everyday, what does it look like in terms of your organizing?
It looks like a lot of emails, a lot of texts, a lot of group chats, like too many group chats. It looks like a meeting after meeting and lots of infographics, and like scheduling meetings is probably the worst part of organizing, and I'm sure many people will agree, because no one's schedule like ever like aligns up perfectly, but that's like part of it, and that's just, it is what it is. I think also it involves just like making sure everyone's like in the loop and like always on the same page, even when they're not at every single meeting. It means like understanding like people's capacity and like knowing that, then like making sure that they're all caught up.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So Victor, would you like to answer next? What does organizing look like in your day-to-day life?
Well, well, honestly, I mean, it always feels like a big action. The way I dive into it and the way I've witnessed many of the amazing organizers here in the city of Newark, and even the EJ housing team at ICT get into it, this isn't just a regular 9 to 5. It can be tough work. Every day there are just many organizations, from nonprofits to grassroots, that have organizers on the ground deeply embedded in many levels of the fight, right? Yeah. So when we think about it every day, I mean, man, it's environmental health issues, from polluting the air, from burning garbage, to bathing in contaminated water, to gentrification, displacement of low income and undocumented families, to organizers on all fronts, at every level, fighting to provide better services and more funding and more programs to help families in need. Fighting to protect tenants from slumlords who seek to get paid for not repairs or doing upgrades or raising rents at craziness. That's why we got things like rent control. You know what I'm saying? I mentioned the rights to counsel before. That that helps a lot of undocumented low income folks. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it to me it doesn't every day, and I give it up to the team. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes I feel like I drop the ball, but you definitely need a good team in this stuff. Doing it on your own is difficult. It's wise to get your family, get your peoples together. Anybody that's invested or who got the passion and the heart of really wanting to do this, you know what I'm saying? Like, those are the folks you got to sit in and do this with, because it's not, not to scare people off. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, work is work. You know what I'm saying? This is not necessarily stocking boxes in the back of a UPS truck, but it's tough, man. Just like Thea said, I mean, emails after emails, Zoom calls, Zoom meetings, like, this is the virtual side of it. You know what I'm saying? We're not talking about pre-COVID when you were on the grounds and door to door and having to be out there in the baking sun if it's hot, or the freezing cold if it's cold, if it's winter time, and you're out there and you're talking and you're engaging and you're really getting people out. You know what I'm saying? It's serious work, and you got to stay dedicated, just like everybody's been saying. You need that, But yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Blessing, would you like to talk about, what does organizing look like in your day-to-day life? Yeah.
Okay, there we go. For me, it's a lot of planning, reading, listening, and educating myself. A lot of, what is that? when to meet, a lot of that going on. It's a lot of sharing resources. I know in our group chats, we have like, I think we're planning on a Man versus Ford watch. That's a documentary about the indigenous population in New Jersey and the whole settlement. We have a lot of resources being shared, but then we also like to check in on each other, make sure our mental and our physical is like, we're still good, and like letting people know that it's okay not to be at every action, that it's okay to like take time to like just get away for a little bit. So yeah, that's the day to day.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really important thing to include as well. Jonathan, would you like to talk about what organizing looks like in your day-to-day life? Oh, I think you are still muted. One second here. Let's see. Can you?
Right? Yes.
Awesome.
Does this sound good? Am I clear?
Yes, you're clear.
All right, good. What does organizing look like in my day-to-day life? I'd have to say, like, I never considered myself an organizer. I don't consider myself an organizer. I'm a teacher. I'm an actual Newark public school teacher, and I do things that are interesting. I'm a debate coach, so I have a commitment to my job that often goes beyond my regular job day. I have a commitment for excellence in what I do with debate. I also have some friends that I've known for 30 years, like Ed Riley, Bashir Akanyele, right? Like some people who are just incredible organizers, like Donna Williams and Baba Zaid, right? So what I end up doing is stuff that I find personally really interesting. It also helps me teach kids better. It helps me be able to understand the arguments that my students make better. And I find it interesting to do when interviewing people, trying to bring together like politicians with activists and try to have conversations that I think would push things further. So I never consider myself an organizer because I mean, I think there's a lot with that, and what everyone has described is like what they do all the time. But part of what I do, I think, is an extension of my job that I love, right? I chose to teach. I chose to teach because I wanted to make a difference. I chose to coach debate because I think it makes a difference, right? Like I think that I can train kids in Newark to out-debate and outthink kids all over the United States and keep pushing, right? Like some of my students have been some of the best, not just in the United States, but have been some of the best in the world, right? Like I had 2 kids make the USA World Team, right? So, but they're doing that through they're getting leadership skills, and a lot of the next generation of leaders were from like I can look at some of the generation of leaders here in Newark, and some of them were in my classroom, some of them were on my debate team, right? And so I feel good about that. So I don't consider myself actually an organizer in a day-to-day. I consider myself someone who takes their job seriously, and I try to do my job really well. I try to think of creative ways to better help. And I think it probably comes back to my own personal philosophy. I concluded in order to get out of like hopelessness after graduating from college and looking at, you know, all of the stuff that a lot of the organizers talked about, right? Like a lot of the bad things that go on. And there's a sense of, like, if you look at all of it actually as it actually is, it can be overwhelming. You're like, how can one person like change all of this? And the answer is you can't, right? Like one person's not going to change all of it. So I concluded through lots of different conversations, one of which was with talk show host Gary Bird. He's on WBLS sometimes now, but like huge back in the day and still very well respected, like legend. But we had this conversation, and he was, from the conclusion of the conversation, I was like, all right, I might not be able to change the world, but I can make my block better. And I concluded that like years and years and years ago. So I was like, I'm a teacher, my blocks will be good. Now I coach debate. That block of debate, that block of communication, that's something I do well. That's something I enjoy. I have a lot of fun doing. So that's what I'm gonna do. That's my lane, right? So I generally stay in my lane, which is why I don't consider myself an organizer, but I know organizers. And, you know, I have deep respect for all the people who do organizing, and I try to have these good conversations that hopefully will benefit organizers and hopefully benefit the next generation of people who will learn from them, right? Like learn from a lot of those struggles so that they can help that next generation, because that's my lane, right? So I think that to answer your question on what do you do on a day-to-day and how, like, I do my job, I have fun, it extends often beyond that because I have a commitment to excellence. But at the bottom line, like, I'm enjoying what I do. And I think that if there's not enjoyment, like actual personal, selfish enjoyment in what you do, I don't think it's sustainable. You can't do it, you'll burn out. Like, you know, I always say there's a thin line between nationalism, like Black nationalism, and self-hate, and which is, I think that's true of all types of organizing and organizing ideology, right? Because when you're organizing and you see stuff and people aren't doing it, and you're organizing and it's just frustrating, right? And there's a very thin line between, I think, organizing and then understanding these inevitable defeats, inevitable things that don't go right, and then blaming the people who you're attempting to help. Like, I think that's what happened to Clarence Thomas. Apparently he used to be real militant back in the day. Didn't work out that way, right? But I think that there's a level of, I think that if there is not joy in what you do, if you do not really love what you do, don't do it. Because you're not going to be good at it. You're going to turn on people. It's going to be like, people talk about toxic organizing environments, and I think a lot of it is because, like, you know, there's so much that it's out of context to what your own personal joy is. I love what I do. Like most people who see me coach debate or have interviews or do that stuff that is all in the line of what I think I'm good at. They're like, wow, you really like what you do. And I'm like, really, I do, absolutely.
Thank you for that. So maybe this ties in a little bit. The next question for you is, what do you consider organizing? And do you consider there being a difference between organizing and activism?
I don't know. I saw that I saw that and I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know of a difference, but I'll give you my impression of what I think it is. I think just like in debate, the most important skill is listening. I think that just like in organizing, from what I can gather, from what I see, from what, based on this conversation and others, I think it's about trying to communicate and listen and understand. I think that part of the things that I see that I think are negative when, like, organizers are cursing people out and, like people who say they represent the community or are getting involved in these really ugly fights, or even in terms of fights that, like, where the other side is vilified, right? Like vilified to the point where you can't talk to people. And I think that organizing is always about being, like, organizing, activism, like basically trying to make the world a little bit better place. Like, and all that is like, because I don't know the difference between them. There probably is a difference. I just don't know it, right? But I think with what I gather you're trying to do is people who are trying to work with other people to make the world a little better, right? I don't know if there's a difference, but I know that in what I perceive that you're talking about, it's about a lot of listening and understanding and empathy. And I think that if there's not a lot of understanding and empathy, I think that it's bad. And I think that, like in Newark, we have lots of different activists who don't get along with other activists, or people who call themselves activists who don't get along with people who also call themselves activists. And I'm like, but you're both trying to make the world a little bit better. You might have different ways of doing it. Like, you're really all trying to make the world better. You're trying to make Newark better. And I see this over and over again. I'm like, because I get along with a lot of different people, because the nature of what I do, I interview people. So I talk to people on both sides. I remember in the water dispute, I was talking to people from the NRDC, I was talking to people from the mayor's office. And, to this day, I don't understand why there was a substantive beef, because they were both attempting to do the same things, make water safer. They both did things tangibly, like we look at, to try to make water safer. They disagreed with each other, and that's cool. You're supposed to, right? And you're supposed to fight. But I think there's a level of vilification that makes actual communication more difficult, right? So I think that, you know, whether it's activism or organizing, I think empathy and listening and understanding and patience with each other as human beings is real necessary. I mean, like, I think on some sides, right, like there's some people who you're never going to persuade. Like there's some people who are just like, you know, like the people who think that the election was a fraud and that, you know, Trump should have won, and you cut one people up, and the people who don't really, like, I think there's a thing of white Christian nationalism that's real, and people look at a cult thing. And that's not most activists. Most activists are actually on the same side on issues. Like they actually agree that the world's messed up and should be better. They disagree with means. They disagree with what things look like in the end. But they're both like, the way things are right now needs to change and be in the same direction. So whether or not, you know, so to kind of answer your question the best way I can, I don't know the difference between activism and organizing. I do know it takes a lot of talking and networking and empathy and patience and understanding and trying to communicate, because I think it's all about communication. One of the reasons why I like coaching and teaching debate is because it's high level communication. To hear what someone's really saying, like beyond the words, to hear what the assumptions are behind things. I think all that is really important, whether you're an activist or an organizer. I think that it's mutual. I mean, it's you got to listen, you got to have empathy, you got to try to have understanding, so you can actually get things done for the people that you claim to care about.
Thank you. So your radio show is called All Politics Are Local. How did you first get involved in local politics? Okay, so Ed Riley is a good friend of mine. Known him for, well, now 30 years. Met on the campus of Seton Hall University. Bashir Kanele, also, we knew each other back when they were in college. I was working at Seton Hall Upward Bound over the summer, teaching kids, thinking about whether I wanted to get in teaching or not, right? So I think that, and this is, I think, real important, a lot of your best friendships and relationships will be formed when you're young. And I've noticed a lot of my friends who I knew in college or high school, or, you know, and people I've taught, they grow up and they do interesting things. Maintain those relationships, keep them. Like, get to know good people who have integrity. Integrity is important. I don't have anyone in my circle that doesn't have integrity, because, you know, why? So, you know, meet good people, right? Like, might disagree, right? We might have lots of arguments, but disagreement doesn't mean enemy. Disagreement just means disagreement. And maybe as a debate coach, I can appreciate that, right? Like, so I've known them for 30 years. We did a magazine called All Politics Are Local. I had published that, did a lot of really great stuff with organizing that, brought me on with that. When he started the radio show at Rutgers this time, him and Bashir Kanele had the program going on. And then they reached out to me. They were like, hey, we know you like to talk. And I'm like, yeah, I do. But these things are relationships that are built over time, friendships that are built over time. So I think that, like, friendships are important. They're valuable. Relationships that you have with people are important and valuable. Acting with integrity at all times is so important, because people can trust you over long periods of time. Even if you might not have talked for 10 years, at the point that you have integrity and your word means something, and you can have this conversation and people kind of know what to expect from you, they know your values at your core, well, it makes it easier to organize with folks, right? So I think that, you know, and work with people. So when I call people up, they know where I'm coming from, right? They know, oh, that's, you know, Jonathan Alston, that the debate team dude. They know if they're coming for an interview, I'm not going to set them up, because we don't set people up in interviews. I really want to try to get out what they're saying, to the point where even people who know, like even political people who know that I do not support them in what they do politically, we can talk and have conversations. There's one politician who we're on very opposite sides, right? And when it comes, especially when it comes to like charter schools, et cetera. And we become good friends, even though we disagree on an issue that means a lot to me. Like this whole charter school, public school thing means a lot to me. But when someone has integrity, even if they're on the other side, even if they're advocating for things that you think are absolutely wrong, you can still be cool. Friends, trust, work, build.
So how I got involved in this end was, made some good friends who were really smart, got a lot of integrity. We kept in touch over the years, and they brought me in when they were doing All Politics Are Local. There's some other really cool people who, joined along the way who also are very good people, like Donna Williams, former councilwoman from Orange, who's just one of the most connected people in the country. Baba Zaid, who's just brilliant and organized and working movements for years. That whole thing is like, you can't really do anything on your own. It just don't work. You have a lot of people around you who have to pick up the slack. I do that even when I coach debate, right? Like, I don't do all this stuff for myself. I have a network. My students have a network of people who are coaches and intellectuals all over the country that we can call up and count on to break things down for us and help us, right? So a lot of it is in just like talking to people and building relationships and having them believe in the stuff that you do.
Thank you for that. All right, so our next set of questions will be for Jorge specifically. First I wanted to come back around. Jorge, what does organizing look like in your day-to-day life, especially relating to, you're co-chair of the North New Jersey DSA chapter, which seems like a huge amount of responsibility. I would love to know, what your day-to-day organizing looks like.
Thank you so much, Lena. And I wish we had a different name for it. I don't like the name chair. I didn't choose it. I wish there could be something different. It sounds a little too, too much like opposition of authority, which I do not want to take. I'm happy to organize a chapter, but we have such a vibrant multi-tendency organization with different modes of structure and operation. But honestly, the day-to-day is like a lot of people mentioned earlier. It's just a ton of Zoom meetings. We have so many working groups. We have so many campaigns, and I think I'll talk about that a little bit later. But we have constant meetings and agenda. But I guess what I really want to focus on, which goes into the idea of organizing, what I do both for the DSA and my full-time job, which is organizing union nurses into taking action, is the essence of what we described organizing is, which is leadership, identification, identifying people who are not already committed to your project and getting them to become committed. So that's leadership identification and then leadership development. So what are the tools that we have to be able to do some of that? There's tons of them that you'll have in your organizer toolbox. But the number two things I think that go hand in hand are the one-on-one conversations, and they're the follow-up, I think are super important. The one-on-one conversation is where it's the most basic unit of organizing that it is so essential, especially when you're trying to bring in somebody into a project and you're trying to inspire them, motivate them, but also create space for them to organize. You need to be able to have that opportunity to learn from them, right? Within an organizing conversation, it's a 70-30 rule, right? 30% is what the organizer talks, 70% is what the other person talks. And that's because it's not about us trying to tell people what to do. If we really believe that people themselves have the power, that they themselves can be the drivers of the kind of change that they want to see, then it's a matter of us asking the right types of questions to be able to have them see what their own power is, right? Whether it's in the DSA, what made you join? We have an influx of tons of new members. We're having constant people coming in who are trying to make sense of the world, right? Post-election, but also in capitalism, right? There's inequality. What do we do? So that conversation is, okay, what do you think is, what does injustice look like to you? How have you seen it in your life? How do you think we can change it, right? Having people be able to have that opportunity that they have a say in that. And then the other part of it is being able to then decide how you can move people into action, right? What opportunities can you create for them to get into action? That's a lot of what I do in my labor organizing. A lot of nurses, they work really hard jobs, especially right now in COVID. It's the front lines, right? Where there's not enough PPE, there's not enough staffing, at least in the hospital I represent in the Bronx. So the issue is that there's not enough resources for people. So how do we fight it? How do we have the power? We have to identify who our enemies are, which is the hospital administration system, which puts patients under profits, right? Profit is their intent. So they're going to give you less staffing. They're going to give you subpar PPE or not give you the quality PPE that you need. So how do we change that, right? We have to organize nurses to take action. Now, some nurses are really ready, right? They're like, you know, I've been a fighter my whole life. I've grown up in a union family and I am going to fight. But for most other people, that's a lot we're asking of people, especially when we ask for things like strikes, which things that affect people's lives. And how do you walk people through that? How do you inspire them to do that? Most people work hard jobs and then you're asking them to come out to this action. You're asking them to come out to this meeting. You're asking them to get a petition and risk their manager looking at them. It's a lot. So what is it that gets people through it? And a lot of it is, one, learning about what matters to them the most, learning about what issues they're facing, and then bringing the question to them. Who has the power to change this? Who is our enemy and what's it gonna take? Do you think us as a staff rep, we're gonna be able to do it? Do you think asking nicely is gonna happen? No, they only listen to disruption. So how do we make people take those steps themselves, give them the tools, but then have them be the drivers of the change they wanna be? So it's about the one-on-one conversation, identifying what motivates people, putting them in action, right? Giving them leadership opportunities, and then following up with them. What did you think about that? How did that go? What do you think you did well? What do you think we can do better? Those are the essence of organizing. And just another part of it is delegating tasks. A lot of organizers, I think we've mentioned this, burn out. We take on a lot of work because we're so passionate, we're so excited. But if we want to build the longevity and the capacity to carry out sustainable work, we need to have layers and layers of leadership. Leadership not necessarily being a structure, but leadership of people believing that they have power and learning how to teach people that they have power, and then those people teaching others that they have power. So that takes a work. And the quote that an organizer in the DSA a long time ago said, Megan Swavida, she's on the DSA National Political Committee, she told me that every task that you do as a leader, any work, any assignment that you do, any project you take on, is a leadership opportunity you're taking away from somebody else. So how do we as organizers identify the work that has to be done? And how do we give that responsibility to other people and let people learn through it, check in with them, offer our support? So I think that's mainly what I do half the time. I'm just in conversations with people on one-on-ones. And then the other part is list building and structure tests. I think it's important to see where everybody's at. Who is the list of people that we want to reach out to? And how do we reach out to all of them? Who are the people who did come out to this action, who did come out to this event, who did volunteer to do that? It's important for us to go through that list and find structure tests where we test out that list. Do we now have, whether it's a DSA, right, where we've grown considerably, we've grown from a chapter that met maybe 20 to 25 people to now having single campaigns and working groups, having 60 people show up and want to take action, right? You know, how do we then follow up with that and let that continue building? And it takes leadership identification, takes leadership development, and it takes list building and structure tests. So that's what the kind of day-to-day work, just a lot of Excel sheets. I have one for my work, for DSA, so many sheets of so many different types of kind of measurements of what we're doing.
Thank you so much. So this next question is also for you, and you answered this a little bit, but I do want to ask it. You know, when you talk about labor organizing, would you be able to explain, you know, what that means to people who might be unfamiliar with labor organizing? You know, what is the goal of labor organizing, and you know, how does that potentially differ from other kinds of organizing that you've been involved with?
Thank you so much. So when I think about labor organizing, I think about power and autonomy. I'm almost nearly certain, but I could be wrong, that everybody here has to work for a living. If not, well, power to you. Well, actually, as I'll go into later, less power to you. But I'm also nearly certain that everybody here has at some point felt disrespected at their workplace, either directly by a manager, due to their working conditions, the kind of wages or the kinds of changes that they experience, or constraints related to their job. The DSA is an explicitly socialist organization, whereby we believe that capitalism is a structure. It's a social system designed by people. People designed the system, but these people are the capitalists or the elite. And it was not decided, and it was not democratically decided by the mass majority of working people. It is designed explicitly to take money from those who labor and instead concentrate it into the hands of a few. While the free market touts bringing freedom, are we free to choose where we work all the time? Are we free to choose to work even? If we choose not to work, what are the consequences? Do we have power to decide as a collective who gets healthcare, who gets housing, who doesn't, or do we even have the right to declare what's a human right? We don't, is my answer under capitalism. The basic problem is power in capitalism is not distributed equally. Not only do employers get to set the agenda within the workplace, they also have the authority and the power to set the agenda for society at large because of their control of the state, their greater resources for lobbying, their ability to buy politicians. Fundamentally, as long as they control investment, they control the creation of all wealth and all income of society. So everybody who has to constantly worry about whether or not these elites are happy. Now, does that sound like freedom or autonomy? Labor organizing is the act of acknowledging the unique structural positions of workers within society and developing the organizations that allow them to leverage that power. That is why socialists talk about unions so much, not just because they offer benefits to a few people who are lucky enough to be in a union, but because unions have historically been sites of struggle and political education for workers of the multiracial working class to build up their own power. They're not the only means in which we organize. Unions, because of the assault of the labor movement by the wealthy for the last few decades because of neoliberalism, union density has declined. Some unions have sold out, or some unions are just totally stagnant and are not actually meeting the needs of their members. That is why there are alternative organizing like IWW, which focuses on organizing the unorganized and direct action, as well as worker centers that organize the unemployed and immigrants as well. So just to kind of summarize a little bit why this is so important is a quote by Vivek Chibber, who writes that the working class is unlike any other social grouping in the non-capitalist sections of modern society. However penurious it is, however dominated it is, however atomized it is the goose that lays the golden egg. It is the source of profits, because unless workers show up to their work every day and create profits for their employers, that principle of profit maximization cannot be carried out. It remains a dead letter. Labor organizing is recognizing the unique power that we have as workers to disrupt the economy and figuring out how strategically we can use that to leverage demands from the most basic level, our workplace, and basic things on how we improve our wages and working conditions, to fundamentally restructuring how we think investment is decided, how we get Medicare for all, how we get housing for all, how we get a Green New Deal.
Thank you so much. So yeah, this next question connects with that. So in the description of the DSA, you were talking about how the intention is to, build power with the multiracial working class, and you were talking about all of your labor organizing, and I was wondering if you could explain the connection between labor organizing and other issues that the North New Jersey DSA are working on relating to defunding police, abolishing ICE, and working with Indigenous groups in solidarity efforts.
Right. So, I think earlier I described a little bit about why socialists believe that the DSA focuses on labor organizing. It's not just because of unique position of workers, but it's also because all of us, except maybe any capitalist that might be in this room that I'm unaware of, it's the fact that we all have to work for a living, right? So that means it affects all of us. So that's a driving force, and that's why there's a unique position to labor. However, earlier I laid out that the structural powers of workers that they have to disrupt capitalism. However, I'm going to go back to one thing I mentioned earlier, which is not only do employers get to set the agenda within the workplace, they have the authority and power to set the agenda for society at large. What this means is that they have influence way beyond their workplace. And this is what also we describe as what defines socialists, that we are opposed to capitalism because it also is a system that exploits people based on race, based on gender, based on sexuality, whether you're indigenous, your immigration status, disability. As socialists, we are against all forms of oppression, and we stand united unequivocally against inequality in every space that we find. Oppressions intersect with one another. We recognize they enforce each other, they produce one another. So it's our responsibility to not only tackle the larger systemic problems going on, we also have to handle oppression at every layer that is involved. So that is why, as a DSA, as a multi-tendency organization, we have national priorities around what we think we want to prioritize, but we also have local organizing groups that decide campaigns, whether sometimes these national priorities fit these demands and we can jump along with it, or sometimes we have to figure out what works to the communities that we're directly organizing in. And that is why, on top of the labor organizing that we're doing, aside from some of the electoral work we've done, we have projects like Defunding the Police that has been about leveraging the power of communities to take back and reimagine what the police is and to abolish it and to create movements of care for one another. And it's our goal to work in coalition with a lot of the local groups that have been spearheading this. Where we care about these struggles, but we also know that there are other organizations that have been leading this. And how do we support and what we are able to, and how do we listen, and how do we combine our efforts to make that work happen? The DSA nationally and locally, we are in favor of abolishing ICE. The ICE is an oppressive, it is a disgusting, it is a horrible institution that incarcerates people for no reason other than where they're coming from, often from countries that have already been destabilized by the US. Our national DSA's prison abolition. We're against abolishing, we're for abolishing ICE. And given the context of New Jersey, a lot of immigrants, personally with family who have been deported, it's an unfair and inhumane system that we have to end, and that we've had longstanding campaigns focused in Essex County, Hudson County, possibly moving to Bergen County, to ending the ICE detention center using pressure tactics like rallies that we have, as well as going to freeholders meetings, calling out elected officials. And we also have our mutual aid working group, which is doing a lot of the work on the ground to build relationships with the community and to provide need through projects of food distribution, but also building solidarity with indigenous groups on the colonial efforts, such as our solidarity with the Ramapo Lenape people, to be able to help them with what they need to be able to establish decolonization, and for us to support and listen and ally with them. So that is a little bit, how we relate both to our labor organizing as a whole, but also kind of locally how we adjust to the campaigns of our community.
Thank you so much. And this connects to that with you talking about working locally. I wanted to ask, many of the groups represented tonight are very local to specific areas and communities. How does North New Jersey DSA, being part of a larger national organization, how does that influence the way that you approach local organizing?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I might be repeating myself a little bit. But as I mentioned earlier, the DSA is fundamentally committed to fighting against capitalism in order to build socialism, a society that is run by the vast majority of people that centers human need over profit. Now, how are we going to make this happen? I think we have to be very honest about the situation we're in. We're going up against a lot. The elite today are some of the most deprived individuals who are absurdly wealthy and incredibly powerful. They control where profit goes. They have profit, so they can buy the media, they can buy politicians, they can even buy nonprofits sometimes in these more devilish efforts of them. So how do we win? How do we make what can seem like a pipe dream of socialism come into reality? It means building our own working class power by being strategic and deliberate on a national scale, but also being rooted in the needs of our community and building meaningful coalitions with local organizations. Going back to the question at hand, as a national organization, we've arrived around 4 priorities. We have several priorities and several campaigns that we have, but our top 4 that we have democratically decided our convention is Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, building a strong labor movement, and running class struggle elections. The first 2 are transformative reforms that would change the balance of power for working people and the environment. The labor movement gives us our structural leverage to make those demands, and the elected officials can popularize those demands on a national scale, as well as help in actually legislating those demands into action. We achieve those demands by A, coordinating national campaigns around these popular demands, but also B, growing our presence, our base, and support within communities. Some of these campaigns have been able to unite us across nationally. So for example, the Defund the Police campaign has been a national campaign that has national demands, but it also encourages chapter to start up their own defund the police campaign that is local and unique to the communities, and that requires us to work effectively with local organizations, listening from those who have been a part of that. There's also there is sometimes one campaign fits all, and different communities have different needs. So while we work on campaigns centered on popular demands and organize around these priorities, when it fits our local context, our organization is broad enough, multi-tendency enough, where we have people engaged in other campaigns, either centered around the local context or work in coalition with other groups that have been doing this work on the ground. So I think that's that dynamic of being able to challenge capitalism at large, but also building up the base and being attentive to all the battles against oppression that I mentioned earlier. And that's why those two are very important for us as a national organization.
Thank you so much for those answers. Awesome. So speaking of you mentioning mutual aid groups, this is a great segue into our next question, which is for Blessing. So you're part of Brick City Mutual Aid, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, what mutual aid is, what are the goals of mutual aid? What does the practice of mutual aid look like on a day-to-day level?
Okay, so mutual aid is basically, well, I guess I can talk about how it differs from charity, because I feel like a lot of people do think of them as one and the same. Generally, charities have a business model, and not to say that all charities are bad or that they're bad at all, but they're usually strings attached. Like, we'll give you this if you do X, Y, Z, and they administer the aid, but they're not like really solving the problem. So like we don't have people with we have people without affordable housing, without healthcare, basic rights, and their needs aren't being met, but they're not solving that problem. And that's where mutual aid comes in. We're giving people the tools to solve the problems for themselves. We're empowering them, because I think that is the root of the problem, right? The communities aren't empowered. So mutual aid brings the power back to the community. So in terms of everyday practices, there's just a little things. So we get donations from people within the community, and we put those donations directly back into the community, whether it's paying for someone's bills or doing grocery runs, just like the little things. So they know that there's someone in their community that they can rely on. So we're trying to form like a network of a community, just like so they can care for one another. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So my next question is also for Blessing. So I wanted to talk about, you have a background in neuroscience and you work as an EMT, which is super cool. I wanted to ask if that background informs your activism, and have you found yourself using any skills from that background within your practice of mutual aid work?
Yeah. So it's definitely informed my activism in terms of, like, I always knew there was a problem with the healthcare system in the US, but I didn't know the extent of it. And so, like, once I started working as an EMT and going into hospitals and seeing patients, I realized, like, how broken this system really is. It's not just about the insurance, it's about, like, the healthcare workers are underpaid, they have like a crazy patient load, and like people aren't getting the care they need even within the hospitals when they get to the hospitals. Or, like, for instance, like police being dispatched on psych calls, like there's no need. So I think that I'm learning a lot as I'm experiencing these things, and maybe I may not be able to do anything about it now, but in terms of bringing it back to mutual aid, Brick City, we're trying to do informative, what would you call it, clinics. Like, we want to set up a Narcan clinic where people can learn how to administer Narcan, so you don't necessarily have to call the cops when, like, someone's ODing, or just like basic life support, like learning how to do CPR. So those sort of things, hopefully I can bring to the table in the near future.
Thank you so much. And this question is also for you. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about what impact Brick City Mutual Aid has on Newark, and from what you've seen, both, like, if you want to talk about as a whole or on individuals, and what would you say is the goal of Brick City Mutual Aid?
Right. So in terms of impact, yes, we do grocery deliveries, and there's like the monetary need and the food services and like the physical need of the community, but it's also kind of giving them a space that they know they're being heard. Like we do talk to a lot of Newark residents, and we're hearing them like what's going on. And I think that's important to know that the community still cares about you, and there is a place to go to, not just the government. You don't need to go to the government. You can like ask your community members for help. And I think that's the impact we have. And that's our goal, basically, to create that network of community care.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So this next question is for Jonathan. I wanted to ask you, how do you see All Politics Are Local contributing to positive change in Newark? I think you are still muted. Jonathan?
Yes, I've just unmuted myself.
Perfect.
All right, great. So what the question again was?
How does All Politics Are Local contribute to positive change in Newark?
Oh, I think a lot of times people just don't have conversations, and the conversations they have are at different levels. They speak different languages, but saying the same thing. I think like one of the things I think that hopefully I do is help people communicate things better. I think that there are a lot of people who are poor who, when they hear socialism, they think that it doesn't apply to them, and it's not their fault because, you know, I know this is going to sound controversial, but I don't think Bernie Sanders is a socialist. I don't think most people who say they're socialist are actually socialist because they don't think the means of production should be owned by the state. Therefore, higher taxation so the taxes can be used more for the commons, so you can pay for things like healthcare, et cetera. I think that healthcare as an industry, people are for the socialization of that, as in like it shouldn't be run by private individuals because things that concern your rights shouldn't have a profit motive. So they're like, shouldn't be private prisons, shouldn't be private police force. And I think that the debate is whether medicine should be in that category, the same category as the military, the police, like schools, right? That are where public money is used for common things that protect our rights, right? And whether Medicare is for that. But generally speaking, like when a lot of people talk about socialism, they're talking about the same types of taxation that existed under Republican President Eisenhower in the 50s, where there's high rates of taxation at the top. And those high rates of taxation lead for you to things like build highways and build a social welfare system and build a huge safety net, right? And I think people may be talking about like, you know, strong unions, which also were stronger back in the 50s. And I'm not trying to be nostalgic at all. Like I'm not like some segregationist being like, oh, the 50s, they had it. But when you're just communicating like what it is, what is the vision and what is the vision for people who actually need it, who, you know, like why are uneducated people voting Republican? Because like people who know just don't want to talk down to them. And the language that's used to communicate with people who ostensibly we need to communicate with the most is language that's frankly inaccessible. So I think that part of what I like to do on All Politics Are Local is just look at the language, the communication, get people to talk to each other who haven't talked to each other, or who might not, or who might be used to having conversations with people who have read the same things, who have the same understanding of the world, and try to bridge that with people who, you know, maybe come from a different perspective, or at least make people think about things in ways that are different. So I think at best, you know, from what my perspective, and what I like most about All Politics Are Local is that we get different people to talk who may not be used to talking to each other. And the more that we can do that, I think the better.
Thank you so much. So in that vein, you have been speaking to so many different influential people in Newark, including a lot of different organizers working on tons of different issues. And so, you know, I feel in some respects you have a pretty good understanding of the sort of, you know, environment of organizing in Newark. Would you be able to speak a little about that from your perspective?
I just very roughly, and again, this is just my own opinion. I think that most of the organizers that I met are very, very good intentioned. I think that most of them network with each other, right? They network with each other, they talk to each other, they have long lines of relationships. I think that there's always beef, right? Like people disagree with one another. The only thing that I would caution is against vilification that's just not productive. I think ultimately, I think organizing has to be practical because it's supposed to better the lives of people. And to some extent, you have to access power. So like your friends aren't always your friends and your enemies aren't always your enemies. And ultimately, I think probably the most compelling story that I've heard was from Raz Baraka, who, and Raz is like, we used to protest and all our protests used to end up down at City Hall. And so that they recognized that there was a direct connection between having political power and being able to implement the vision that they wanted for the community, right? And so, and that's what they've done, right? They have been implementing, like in terms of defund the police, before defund the police was a popularized term in popular culture this year, Newark had been doing that for a few years, so much so didn't even recognize, like when there was an article that came out in Politico that said that, you know, Raz Baraka thought defund, and the title then was Raz thought defund the police was a bourgeois answer, et cetera, right? Like, and it was like insulting defund the police, but really defund the police was used interchangeably with abolish the police, which are two very different things, right? Like one, like they're just not, they shouldn't even be used in the same sentence because they represent very different understandings of policing. One is reform, and one, like defund the police is really like de-stress the police, like give them less stress, give them less money, give them, put money in other areas and have them do less work because they're stressed out and they're doing things that they really aren't equipped to do. They're dealing with mental health crises. You need a lot more social workers to deal with that because, like they'll talk about, 90% of the calls from the police aren't going to deal with issues of violence, right? So all of that to really be able, like, it's, I think that, and going back to your question of like, where do I see the role of all politics to local, especially in terms of language? That's the question I'm answering, right? Because I sometimes, I just want to make sure I'm answering your question.
We moved on to another question, which is more like, you know, you have met with
in terms of looking at organizing and where they are, right?
Yeah,
and
like
so
how that
right.
looks from your perspective in Newark.
Okay, great. And so yes, and that's where I was going in terms of the vision, right? Like activists want their vision to be implemented. Part of how that vision gets implemented is by accessing political power, which is what they did, right? So when they're like, hey, we used to protest all the time and we used to end up at City Hall, then, you know, they started you know, dealing with their vision. And so this article comes out, and this article was real interesting because it was like, it was conflating the two. And it was conflating the two in a way that was really confusing to the writer, confusing to the audience. People were like, wait, is he for or against defund the police? Because he's doing it. And he, in the same press conference, he announced taking money from the police and put it towards social services, more so, right? A policy that they'd already been doing. And so that's why I'm saying that, like, part of what I see and the way that I see the goal of activists is to get their vision implemented for the people who need it. And if you can't get your vision implemented for the people who need it, then, you know, and not everyone uses government. Sometimes it's like just people organizing with each other, right? And that's cool, right? Like, but it's the implementation of your vision. So you have to work with organizations that there might be beef with. So like, it is always about trying to find that common ground with people you actually need for those very specific goals. So I think that ultimately I see the best organizers doing that. I see the organizers who are most effective being organizers who are able to communicate with people who they don't, bringing people on and adding, right? So that their vision becomes our vision. And that whole our, whether they're implementing what they want to do through government or whether they're implementing what they want to do through mutual aid, through other like-minded individuals, they got to get past the beef. They have to, they work on getting past the personal issue. And some of the stuff, like, as just in the history of organizing, we know that a lot of these beefs are by provocateurs. Like, there are people who are in our communities and have always been in our communities that do things deliberately to mess up things. So I think that a lot of the things that we need to always push is, if it ain't about communication and if it's not about building, then it's probably not going to be effective. So anytime you hear someone tearing someone down, like doing stuff that's going to, like, you know, alienate people who need them, it's probably not going to be effective activism. The activism that I think is most effective is the ones that over the long run build bridges. And that doesn't mean you don't have to punch someone in the mouth every once in a while, but just as you hit them hard, you also smooth it out. Just as you push really hard in one situation, you're like, okay, we can agree on this, and find areas where you do agree on. Because I think ultimately it's not about the individual, it's not about us as individuals and anything that we do. It's actually about the people that we claim to represent, and the people that we hope to help. Like, and me, that's me in terms of education, the people I'm teaching, the debate team that I'm trying to build, right? So I'm trying to actually help kids in that way. So I, work with a lot of different people. Like, when I was a coach, still am a coach, but I mean, like, during my coaching career, I've worked with multiple superintendents who I did not get along with. Some of them, like the current superintendent's awesome, amazing, loves debate. I've known him for years. Again, someone I've known since I was a kid is actually the superintendent of schools right now. So that's awesome. Networking, integrity, all times, build relationships. But at the same time, like the previous superintendent, Chris Surf, or Cami Anderson, like, I actively spoke out against them multiple times, right? But I also had to have conversations with them because I have a team, I receive city funding, right? Like, so I had to have real honest conversations. And at the same time, they respected the stuff that I did because they knew it was effective. So I would push some things in some ways and I would push other things in other ways, but I would always have an honest conversation with them, even when I knew we disagreed, because there was other stuff that we knew we would agree on. So we would disagree on one area over here, and we'd agree on, the importance of the things that I do and I teach the kids. And I make sure a lot of other people know that too, in terms of, just how we work. So I see that as long as activists are focused on their goals of being actually like effective for their communities, and they communicate in a way that brings people in, and so that they can be effective for their communities, then I think it's good, right? Like, you have to access power and you want to get your vision pushed in some way or another. And I think that that's ultimately the goal.
So my next question for you has to do with the skills that you use in teaching and your job. How do those skills get transferred into, when you do network with different people, when you do try to, push for positive change in Newark on a political level? Do you see the skills from your teaching applying to that?
Well, just for clarification, I don't really push for change in Newark specifically, like as in policy changes, et cetera. I push for things for my particular team, and I train others to do it. And I have conversations where people can use those conversations to do it, right? So I would not classify myself as consistently an advocate. There's some things I've advocated for in the past, but all that comes down to the same thing. I train people to be leaders. How do I train them to be leaders? Through advanced communication skills. That's what I teach with debate. I teach people how to be advocates. It's an advocacy training course, how to make arguments, how to recognize arguments, how to recognize when someone's BSing, how to have different forms of persuasion. There's ethos, pathos, and logos. All of them you need to use when you are actually doing the things that you want to do, because communication is ultimately about connecting. If you're talking and you're not connecting, that's not the fault of the people who don't get you, right? And I think that that's huge. I think that ultimately the thing that I try to teach others, the things I try to like demonstrate, is if someone does not get what communication is about a sender and a receiver. If they ain't receiving what you send in, you need to send something different. It's not their fault. They're not stupid. You're just not a good communicator. They don't get you, and it is you. So change your message and connect, because that's your job. And so I try to teach people how to communicate and how to connect. If what you're saying scares people, then stop scaring people. If what you're saying connects to people, then connect. It's not that they're not educated. They might not be educated, but you're still scaring them and you're trying to communicate something, right? So if you know you're scaring people, if you like, it's not like up to you to be like, hey, they just need to raise it up. They just need to read more. They just need to, no, you're the advocate. If you're the advocate, advocate, right? And so that's what I teach. That's what I teach in debate. That's what I teach kids. I teach them 7th grade on. I do workshops for adults because we teach the same thing I teach 7th graders is the same thing we deal with 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders and grown people. Sometimes when we do debates for adults, those debates that we do, where like politicians are debating and we're moderating those debates, like we have conversations with the politicians beforehand. And the same skill set that I'm teaching my 7th graders to 12th graders is the same skill set that I'm teaching to, or at least giving to, or offering to adults, because these are advanced communication skills that everyone needs to have access to. So recognizing what an argument is, recognizing how to warn an argument, understanding different levels of persuasion, right? Practicing, rehearsing those levels of persuasion, understanding that you have to connect. It's your job to connect. If something's important to you and you think other people should get it, well, you need to package it in a way that they get it. If they don't get it, then it's not their fault, it's yours. And I think that's true of all organizing. I think organizing is about communication. So I think we can have conversations with ourselves and we can sound real smart and like it could just be real good. It could be accurate. It could be like, you read all the literature that you need to read. But if you're not connecting to the people that you claim to want to support, if you're not connecting to the people who you claim to help, then what you doing? And I think that if there's anything that I can offer to anyone, from my students to the way in which I move in the world, is that if you're an advocate, it's about communication and it's all about connection. Did you connect to the person who you claimed to want to help? And if you do, that's cool, keep doing it. If you're not, don't blame them. There's a thin line between, there's a thin line between Black nationalism and self-hate. And I think that's the same thing for all activists and all organizers. There's a thin line between people who cut their hair and join Wall Street, right? Because there's a frustration that'll build in. If you sell and they're not getting, you blame them, you walk away, you become the enemy, right? If you're humble enough to understand that the reason why you're not connecting is because your communication skills suck and you need to change the things that you're doing to connect, well, I think that gives a different level of longevity because it's tethered to an understanding of other people's humanity and our own fallibility and our sometimes tendency to get stuck in what is familiar and to be talking to people who read the same things and think the same way, as opposed to people who we actually need to communicate with to build anything that's larger.
Thank you. So this next question, this will be to sort of wrap things up because I know it's getting late. So this one is a question for everyone, and it's just, how does someone get involved with your organization or project? And I wanted to start with Thria. So Ridgewood for Black Liberation, if someone, is in Ridgewood and is like, that sounded really cool, how would they get involved?
If you're interested in getting involved with our letter writing campaign, definitely check out our kickoff on Sunday, the 29th, like I said. I'll drop the link in the chat, but I think someone else already did. And then also we have like our toolkit and zine that I helped make on defunding the police. So check that out as well and figure out how to also help with that. It's all in our link tree. I also want to plug this other org that I'm in just very briefly. I'm helping out with Anakbaya in North Jersey, and they do like a mutual aid program in Jersey City called the Peaceland Bread Program. So if you're interested in volunteering for that, I'll send a link in the chat as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, Victor, how would someone get involved with the Ironbound Community Corporation?
Yeah, thank you. Somebody wanted to get involved with our organization, they can check out our website at http:/ironboundcc.com or .org, I'm sorry. Also check out our Facebook and our Instagram pages. Come support our Compassionate NJ page on Facebook. Check out our current campaign with pushing the People's Bill. And anyone facing housing issues in Essex County, Newark, definitely reach out to our housing justice team at ironboundcc.org email, or you can reach out to me, 973-558-6368. I'll make sure I add this into the chat box as well. Also, those interested in checking out Zulu Union, www.zuluunion.com. The page should be active. I mean, I know we were doing some updates, so if it's not up, it'll be back up soon. You can check out our Zulu Union support page on Facebook and Instagram, and check out the Lost Tribe Foundation on Facebook as well. Thank you guys. Bless y'all. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having the opportunity to listen to all of you guys. All of you are definitely, all of you are valuable in the work that you're doing. I greatly appreciate everything that you guys are doing from every front line that you guys are on. And send my prayers to each of you, man. Blessings, and I hope we definitely cross paths out there. You know what I'm saying? I hope. Peace.
Thank you so much. So next, Jorge, could you talk about how people could get involved with the DSA?
Yes, I can, and I will. There are so many things we are doing right now. We have so much work to do. So we would love if anybody found anything of what I said. Of course, everyone join all the work here. You know, we're all organizing and all these projects sound so exciting. So let's all commit to organizing at a baseline. But if you're interested in what the North Jersey DSA is doing, please feel free to join us. I'm going to post on.
Oh, you got muted.
Okay, am I still on here?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So if anybody wants to join, I'm going to give the baseline information. We have a bunch of different working groups and committees that I'm going to list out real quick, that if you go through that website or go through that email, I can forward it to the right person. But we do have, we're preparing our electoral working group to run Real Socialist within the North Jersey DSA area and hopefully win and advocate and popularize class struggle demands and move some of the constituency that we want to win. We're doing labor organizing. We have a jobs program we're going to be trying to do, as well as labor notes trainings that we're going to provide people who are in unions or outside of unions and how to organize and how to learn some of the basic components of organizing. We have our ongoing Defund Police, where we're coalition with a lot of local groups such as People's Organization for Progress, Newark Water Coalition, the Maroon Project, and other orgs within the area. We also have a housing working group, an eco-socialist working group, which, you know, I'm going to get a little personal here, which Victor, I think you know who leads those group, which is Drew Curtis, also from the Iron Community Corp. I hope he's okay with me mentioning that. But we have some really talented, really skilled organizers, so I can connect them. And we also have our mutual aid working group, which includes several ongoing projects as well within that group, solidarity for decolonization efforts, food distribution, and collaborations with Know Your Rights training. So we have so much coming up. Please follow us on social media, reach out to us in any way, a form. We have a good mobilizing program. We'll plug you in and get you where you need to go. So happy to be here with so many people. I hope we find opportunities beyond this virtual space to connect.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Blessing, how would people get involved with Brick City Mutual Aid?
First, I just want to say thank you to Lena for having me on this panel, and thank you to all of you participants. I'm definitely going to sign up for some communication lessons, hopefully. To sign up for Brick City, all you have to do is go to our website, brickcitymutualaid.org. Yeah, there's a volunteer form. You just fill it out, and simple as that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Jonathan, if somebody wanted to perhaps be interviewed on All Politics Are Local, you know, if they're a local organizer, how would that work? How would they reach out to you? Oh, you're muted.
All right, cool. So, and I already put in the chat, allpoliticsarelegal@gmail.com. That's a common way to reach us. And so whether you want to be interviewed, if you want to do things that are associated with the stuff that I do, that I teach in debate, that too, that same place to reach through. And before COVID, I was doing quarterly like workshops, and we'd have local activists, some people who worked in the city, some people who did various activism work, and we would teach like those building blocks of advocacy communication for all sorts of things. And so people would use it in the workplace, and they would use it as they needed it, right? Like, because ultimately I think that these are just advocacy skills, right? And I think that it's just looking at the art of looking at communication as both an art and a science, to be able to package the things that you're saying and doing to reach the audience that you want to reach, right? So it's about knowing your audience and knowing like those common values and being able to translate and package to actually connect to whatever that audience is, whoever it is, right? So yeah, so allpoliticsarelocal@gmail.com. If you hit me through there, we'll get that. Also, I'm a teacher at Science Park High School, so you can also just look up my my teaching email address. They're all public, right? I'm a public person as a teacher. So, if you want to reach me there through my actual district email, some people do that. They can do that as well. But allpoliticsarelocal@gmail.com.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to thank each and every one of you. I feel so honored to get to speak with you all tonight. This was absolutely a fabulous panel. I'm so pleased. And it was just really fun to listen to you all and, hear all the different issues that everyone is working on in Northern New Jersey. And it definitely makes me feel much more hopeful knowing all this great work that's happening. And I hope that everyone in our audience is having their spirits lifted a bit and feeling more empowered to connect with other folks and either start organizing or keep organizing. So thank you all so much to everyone who is watching and to the panelists. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening tonight. Hope you all sleep well. I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Keep wearing masks. And so thank you so much, everyone who attended.
And thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great one, everybody.
Absolutely.
Take care.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Peace.